Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nina Babrad from Capgemini. I'm the Vice President of Operations in the insurance sector based out of Canada. I'd like to welcome everybody to this broadcast today. And with me are colleagues from the Everest Group. I'm joined by Manu Agrawal, who is the Practice Director at the Everest Group, and Saurabh Verma, who is a Senior Analyst. Just logistics for this call. We will be on mute mode for most of the call. You will see on the right-hand side of your screen, there is a panel that has a bar that says questions. If you have any questions, please use that to note down anything that you'd like to hear more about. And towards the end of the session, we will be attempting to answer any and all questions that come our way. So I will be turning it over to Manu and Saurabh to start this webinar, and we hope that this is going to help you understand some of the insights that we can share from both a research and a practical perspective. And I will turn it over to Manu and Saurabh to start us off. Thank you.
Thanks, Nina, for the introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. So the agenda for the discussion is, we'll be covering three aspects of the life and health insurance industry. We'll talk about the challenges. We'll try to envision what would future look like, and then we'll try to see how digital transformation can mitigate some of the challenges and create readiness for the future. We'll also spend some time on a case study. Let's get started. Kasha, the control isn't working. Can you help us? Yes, it's working now. So if you look at the challenges which health and life insurance industry is facing, there are a number of them. So there is continuation of margin pressures driven primarily because of the stagnating or declining premiums, and then rise in the cost of operations. Kasha, the controls are not working.
Can you try again, Saurabh? Because I gave you the control.
Okay. Yes, it's working now.
Okay, thank you.
Apologies for the issue. Okay. So, and if we talk about the intense regulatory environment, there are a number of reforms which are happening around consumer protection, capital adequacy, risk management, corporate governance, and cyber security. Further, because of the inefficiencies in the operations and high turnaround time, the insurers are being challenged at multiple fronts. It is driven because of the fragmentation in operations, the suboptimal coordination, the existing legacy tech systems, and then of course high manual intervention in delivery of processes. If we talk about the customer, so the customer is evolving and it's demanding multiple things. It's demanding personalization. It wants multiple channel access, seamless experience across all those channels, and then it wants instant processing of the request. So that is driving the need for customer centricity for the insurers. On the product design and innovation side, there is a rising demand for personalized products. So insurers are finding it challenging to create products which incentivize the customers. And then, of course, there are challenges around targeting the non-traditional segments. If we talk about the changing competitive landscape, a recent surge in insurtechs and aggregators is proving a significant challenge for the existing insurers. And again, all these challenges put together are putting significant pressure on the insurers. So given the maturity curve of different insurance is different, it could be different in terms of the technology systems, it could be different in terms of the existing operations health, could be different in terms of the market presence. So based on these specific things, different insurers might feel different intensity of these challenges. So let's have a poll to understand what are the key challenges, what are the most impactful challenge which you guys are facing. Can we have the poll, please? So we talked about 6 challenges, but we have put here 5 challenges. We understand that regulatory pressures is something which everyone is facing, and that there's a little which can be done to mitigate that. So we have about 30 seconds to get the answers. Okay. So here are the results. So inefficient operations and high turnaround time is the one which bothers the audience the most, and of course then a lot of other challenges as well. So as I said earlier, this all depends the maturity curve of technology systems which are existing, the operations health, and other factors as well. So now that we have talked about the challenges, let's look into the future. Let's try to envision what the future could look like. Kasha, I need control, please.
You have it.
Okay. So if you look into the future, what would future be? It would be manifestation of customer centricity, efficiency, speed, cost effectiveness, and there would be leverage of next gen technologies. So what we have tried to create is a view by the value chain by highlighting how different processes within the insurance ecosystem would look like. So if we look at product development and business acquisition, we envision that the actual models will evolve. They will include a lot more data, a lot more parameters, including social media, consumer behavior, consumer preferences, etc. And this will all lead to development of product which would be more suited, more personalized for the users. And if we come to the product launch time, it is expected to happen in weeks instead of the current time, which is in months and years. And we also see that systems will be configurable enough to accommodate any regulatory changes which happen in the foreseeable future. Talking about the new business management. So currently, most of the ecosystem in insurance in United States is primarily driven by agents and brokers. What we see that the customer acquisition will pretty much be done digitally. There would be modularity in product personalization, and then risk underwriting would be pretty much automated. Policy execution, premium collection, and enrollment would be almost real time. And if we start seeing the policy servicing and claims processing side of it, we see most of it will be driven, will have options of self-service. It will allow state through processing of claims, and things will happen pretty much digitally. Now that we have seen the challenges and we have envisioned the future, let's try to figure out what is that which can bridge this gap, what is that which can mitigate the challenges and lay the foundation for readiness for the future.
So as we heard in the last few minutes, obviously the insurance industry, both the life, health, as well as some of the other lines, they're facing a fair degree of challenges, and there's a lot to be done to kind of mitigate those. The, there have always been traditional approaches of rip and replacing of existing platforms, but in the lack of the investment or the risk appetite, what can an insurer do to still get the same efficiency and go down that journey of achieving that future, making it real? So we're looking at some of the digital transformation levels here, and broadly we divide them into 8 buckets. There's the digital front end where you look at social media, you look at mobility, etc., etc. You have modernization of platforms, robotic process automation, AI, workflows, and so on and so forth. Each of these solutions has a role to play on your digital journey. And what can these digital levers really help you mitigate? We talked about these 6 challenges in the beginning, and as my colleague mentioned, regulatory is something which you can't necessarily solve for. The regulations will keep coming up. The authorities will put more and more of those on every year. There are certain pieces you can do to make make yourself more nimble and respond to those regulatory challenges. But truly, rest of the 5 pieces and all of them can be addressed through these digital levers. And they can really help you achieve that higher customer satisfaction, greater efficiency, real-time efficiencies, personalization, etc., etc. And all of this can be made real through these digital levers. So let's do a quick poll at this point and try to understand where do all of us see ourselves from a digital standpoint. What do you think? Kasha, can we have the poll, please? What do you think is more important for your digital maturity? Is it the front end, which is largely around the social media channels, the mobility apps, and the web effectiveness? Or is it more around the digital back end, around process efficiencies? Which do you think is the more important? We'll take 30 seconds for the poll. Okay, so about a 60-40 split with the back end coming as more important. Definitely interesting to see. So let's look at what we have actually observed and what is the kind of analysis, what does the analysis say from a broader insurance standpoint? Kasha, can we have the control back?
Yes, you have it.
Thank you. Okay. So 75% of the insurers agree that digital definitely is important and it has the potential to transform the insurance sector. But here's another insight. 90% of insurers also believe that legacy infrastructure is a huge barrier towards modernization. And what that essentially means is that the digital transformation, when applied just to the front end, isn't enough to get the efficiency that you're looking for. As long as your infrastructure is not caught up, you will continue to face those challenges, and which is where the full integration of the front and back office suite is really what helps make that difference. So what are some of those dilemmas that an insurer typically goes with, and what are some of the pieces that what are some of the options that are in front of you? So let's look at one of the examples at a time. So let's talk about the product launch time. In the conventional view of doing this, when a new insurance product has to be taken to market, typically the launch time ends up being very high. Ends up being in fact in months, if not longer. But with a digital front end, what you can do is quicken the reach of this plan to the customers. It will not really help you reduce the launch time, but when it does get launched, it will probably increase the popularity of the plans, the reach of the customers, and overall, in general, you're likely to have a higher signage of plans. But if you can go ahead and do the digital front and back integration, you can pretty much cut the product launch time down to at least a few weeks, if not even lower. And what that essentially does is it gives you higher speed to market, it gives you better reach to the customers, all in one package. So on similar lines, let's look at some other categories as well. So I'll not go through them point by point, but just to clear a few, let's look at product customization or personalization. In the current scheme of things, the scope is limited, it's very time consuming, it takes a lot of effort. With the front end, yes, the customization can happen, but in limited pockets. It's largely an interface where you can play around with some data analytics part of it, but the digital and front end integration is, the front and back integration is what really helps you, allows you true customization of products and build add-ons into it. Wait 5 seconds before we move to the next slide for everybody to absorb this one. It's a lot of content here, so we'll take a 5-second pause and move to the next page. Okay. So what are some of the rules for achieving digital maturity? So essentially, we are comparing three models here. So you have the traditional in-house model where you can do all by yourself. You can do the technology and the operations internally. You can use a technology service provider, a SaaS or a platform as a service kind of model, or you can go with the TPA and a BPO kind of a service provider. So what happens from the investment perspective? Obviously, if you're doing it in-house, the investment is very high. It's extremely loaded towards the front end of it, and you have limited opportunities to capitalize on it and spread it over various set of operations. When you use a SaaS service provider, a lot of that investment can be converted into an OpEx structure. You don't need to necessarily pay too much upfront, except for maybe some implementation costs. And the service provider obviously can spread it over a larger volume. And a similar structure that exists with the TPAs and the BPOs. But what about some of the other criteria here? So product readiness, extremely slow when it comes to in-house, but very high when it comes to technology provider. A BPO provider or a TPA provider also fares pretty high on that one. But when we look at things around operational support, likely that a technology vendor is not going to provide too much of it. Their role is limited to a IT play, but a BPO service provider or a TPA provider, as well as internal operations, can handle that seamlessly. Similarly, moving down to the last couple of rows, the control and the product innovation. One of the major factors that we see for insurers retaining certain operations in-house is the control mechanism part of it, which it's no denying is high from an in-house perspective, but the costs associated with that is equally high as well. So going with that service provider approach of leveraging a BPO provider can give you about some control with a reasonable cost. But when it comes to innovation, again, no wonders, the technology vendors end up outscoring over there, just marginally ahead of third-party providers.
Okay, having talked about these aspects, let's look at a case study where a large LNP insurer adopted third-party route for digitalization of operations. So let's look at the problem statement. The operations were costly, especially on the new business management, agent setup, and death claims. The processing cycles were long, especially for the unresolved payment part of it. The error was pretty high, and of course, driven off by all of these, the customer satisfaction was very low. What the third-party service provider ended up doing, they deployed a solution. They introduced business process flow optimization. They did the automation of data entry, updating of policyholder details, accounting of premiums, and then they also looked into automation of some of the parts of resolution of unresolved retirement premiums payment cases. The technology leverage was around digitization solutions, workflow solutions, and RPA, which was sourced from a leading RPA vendor. And then there were some solutions around decision support, which were leveraging some part of basic analytics and some part of more advanced analytics, such as predictive and prescriptive. So the benefits turned out to be 55% reduction of FTs, and that was specific to the pockets wherein automation solution was deployed and workflow optimization was done. That translated into 85% reduction of handling time. Accuracy improved to 99% from 86%, and the NPS score that rose from 39% to 66%. That is an area where a third-party service provider has helped an insurer truly mitigate some of the existing challenges. That is all we wanted to cover from our side. Over to you, Nina.
Thank you. Thank you. So what I will be walking you through a little bit is kind of like the on-the-ground perspective from a TPA's viewpoint. So if we can go to the first slide, Kasha, if you could do that for me, that'd be great. So in terms of, for those of you who don't know very much about Capgemini, we have a pretty large customer base that we've been working with for many, many years, not just in consulting and application development, but also providing BPO and third-party administration services. So we have a variety of customers across all of the key sectors in P&C life and health. The area that I work in is primarily focused in life. We also have a large footprint in the US with long-term care and health. So there's a lot of overlaps actually between all of the three pillars in terms of some of the basic themes. And if we can go to the next slide, I can talk to you a little bit about what some of our clients are saying about why digital matters to them. So all of our customers are thinking about this to some degree. For some, it's a strategic imperative. For some, it's they're just starting to think about what can they be doing to get onto the digital road. When you talk about digital, we're not talking about necessarily massive transformation for the insurance sector. Some companies are looking for very innovative ways to take their products to market, but others are thinking about shorter term tactical ways to get into the digital stream and understand how to better apply that for their individual company. Both answers are correct. It really depends on the appetite of the insurer in terms of how much they want to invest into redefining their business models. But competition is certainly a key area that our customers worry about because they know that consumer expectations are changing. They know that their competitors are also looking at digital and looking for ways to innovate and attract new clients. So the feeling out there is that, from a competitive perspective, if they don't get on this track, they will be left behind. Similarly, when customer demand is such that traditional insurance companies, with all of the constraints that Saurav and Manu mentioned in terms of traditional legacy, the customer demand doesn't match the infrastructure, it's very challenging for insurers to figure out how do they actually get on the digital journey and be able to overcome some of those issues. Part of that we're seeing is a growing demand for both software as a service and business processing as a service solutions. Interestingly enough, Amazon just conducted a poll last week asking startup entrepreneurs if they were to start up a new company, would they invest in their own infrastructure? And the answer was almost 100% no. A lot of insurance companies are also starting to move in that direction, saying, maybe cloud, given the developments in security infrastructure, InfoSec protocols, and the ability to define which geography you want your data hosted, maybe cloud's not such a bad thing, and maybe I should not be running a huge data center and all my own applications. Maybe I should be outsourcing that so that I can focus on what matters to my clients and to my product development team, my actuarial, my financial results, and somebody else worries about managing the day-to-day operations. In terms of technology integration, that's a big challenge with insurance companies running with very heavy legacy footprints. A lot of our customers are talking about conversion onto standard platforms and modernized solutions. Others are thinking about looking at technology wrappers and ways to front end their legacy platforms to give them more agility. Some are looking for things like robotics to be able to automate processes that are currently very manually intensive. And I can tell you that we've been doing the same thing in our Canadian operations as well, looking for ways to automate what are currently very repeatable manual transactions. Domain expertise is critical on the digital journey because, as we all know, in the insurance industry, concerns about regulations, data security, privacy, compliance, all of those restrictions have to be taken into account when you design your digital journey. You can't ignore them. And while digital is attractive, in some areas it may be perceived to be extremely high risk for some of our carriers because they just don't feel that they're ready to fully embrace a digital roadmap and not be able to address all of the compliance and regulatory issues that they have to deal with every day. However, the end-to-end transformation demands are growing. We do have a lot of emphasis now internally at Capgemini. We talk a lot about this acronym called SMACT, which is social, mobile, analytics, the Internet of Things, looking at how do we actually leverage cloud to drive innovation. This is something that a lot of insurance companies are thinking about and trying to solve for themselves. We're trying to solve that as well, and I believe that we have some strategies in place, and Capgemini has been working with a lot of carriers to help them define what their digital roadmap looks like. Finally, and I'm not going in order, as you will notice, business outcomes and business transformation capabilities are critical for our clients. They don't see themselves 10 years from now looking the same, feeling the same, being able to offer the same kinds of services as their competitors do with a very heavy cost footprint. So looking at ways of leveraging analytics to understand their client and market base better, looking for ways to leverage social and mobile technologies to be able to drive customers to buy from them and also to service their customers is becoming increasingly important. We can move to the next slide, please. So in terms of the business imperatives, we've come off of probably 2 decades of process re-engineering, trying to figure out how to do things faster, better, cheaper, figuring out how to eliminate redundant processes, simplify processes, and leverage technology. What we're seeing in terms of the re-engineering agenda, working from the bottom up, the customer engagement is driving many of the digital design elements of how insurers want to proceed on this journey. And we're exactly the same. What is the customer asking for? What do they need? What do they want? Why will they buy? Why will they continue to buy from you? And why would they refer you? You know, we talked about earlier about the Everest team talked about the net promoter scores increasing because of the digital transformation. We're seeing the same effect in insurance carriers. We're seeing the same effect within Capgemini, where better, faster, cheaper really translates into meeting what are essentially table stakes now from a market perspective. Demographics have changed. Mobile has given people the opportunity to do whatever they want, whenever they want. Not a lot of mobile customers worry about whether or not they're doing something that meets your batch window. This is something that we have to think about very carefully in terms of how do we provide customers with access to their data, their information. How do we provide our agents with information about the status of their portfolio and what's going on with their customers in a very dynamic way, because that's what they expect. Sometimes what we've seen is that the whole opportunity for innovation and leveraging that has actually given people an opportunity to think about their processes in a different way. So when we talk about externalization of processes, what we're really talking about is looking at processes from the outside in. What does the customer expect, and how can I deliver that and design my processes to meet that expectations? And then, of course, we have new tools and capabilities that are available in the market, and they're growing every day. We have robotics, we have AI, we have all kinds of automation that is available that wasn't available even 10 years ago, that allows us to even leverage some of our existing assets to deliver enhanced services and better customer experiences across the board. Could we go to the next slide, please? So the big question is, where do you start? How can an insurance company embrace the digital journey? How can they get started? Where should they get started? And if we look at these 4 key areas: digitized operations, integration, automation, business insights, and customer experience, they're all equally important in terms of the items that you have to have on your radar screen, but the customer experience is what's going to actually drive many of the projects and programs that you launch as part of digitizing your business. From a customer experience, if you look at the retail sector, live chat, SMS, email, apps, all of those things are commonplace. The insurance industry has been slower to adopt that, particularly on the life side, less so on the property and casualty side, which is a much more, consumer-oriented sector of the insurance industry in terms of the customer experience. Life insurance carriers have been a little bit slower to adopt that. However, the expectations are, as a client, whether I have an auto policy or a life policy or a group dental policy, or if I have a long-term care policy, I expect to be able to interact the same way with them as I would with potentially any retailer that I deal with. So trying to bridge that gap between what the customer expects and millennials expect, new generations of consumers are going to expect, and how do we address in the insurance industry is going to be something that we have to be very critically aware of and design our products and services around that. Business insights, leveraging the data that we have, expanding how we leverage that data, sourcing new data to marry with the internal data that we have, provides us an opportunity to think about the services that we deliver differently, can provide us also with opportunity to provide new kinds of services and potentially even look for alternative distribution channels. And that's where integration and automation comes in. There is a life insurance carrier who partnered with a retailer in the UK that is a retailer who specializes in all things for babies. So if someone's having a child, you can go to the store and buy, clothes, you can buy toys, you can buy cribs, what have you. The insurance company actually partnered with this firm, and they put on their website a shopping basket option to add a term life policy for the family, because there's a changing life event and somebody was shopping, buying baby clothes and offering up a limited term policy that is a guaranteed issue policy that they could actually add to their shopping cart and make it part of their whole transaction to buy the clothes for the baby. So those kinds of opportunities requires a degree of integration that only digital can get you. Excuse me. In terms of the operations, figuring out how to leverage legacy, replace legacy, how to build, excuse me, capabilities to do faster product development, but also faster issuance of policies, for instance, or quicker servicing, or even quicker acknowledgement to the distribution channels or the clients that you have what they are looking for. A really good example is if a life insurance company works in a wholesaling environment, it's all about shelf space, and it's all about being first to quote, for instance, on a fully underwritten policy. In the digital world, there's an opportunity to keep the distribution channel apprised of every step of that transaction, so they know that, one, you have it, two, they know when to expect a quote, and in a first comers environment, whoever wins the race of putting the quote in front of the producer is most likely to win the business. So digital gives you an opportunity not just to improve your internal processes, but also to increase your market share with specific channels. Also, by putting in new platforms with a lot more agile product design features, one of my colleagues calls them Lego blocks, you can build products faster, you can build a product chassis and all of the variable components much quicker to get that out to market, to respond to what you've gleaned from your business insights, and to respond from what your distribution channel is telling you, and to respond from what your customer experience is telling you. Next slide, please. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples in terms of what we think about as we move towards becoming a digital TPA. We're well on that road, and we've done quite a lot of research and analysis and worked with customers to understand what the market is asking for us today. Now, this list may change 2 years from now, but at this point, what the market wants and what we believe are critical components to our digital TPA service offerings are around customer acquisition and policy servicing, and then we'll talk about the other business areas in the next slide. But what the customers really want is to be able to leverage social media and buy online, be it on a mobile or a laptop or a tablet. They want to be able to have real-time updates in terms of the cycle of their piece of business. Agents want to have a flexible quoting sandbox so they can actually configure products on the fly, if you will, to suit the customer's requirement. Having really intuitive and easy to complete data entry forms where they have to, instead of navigating through complex and repeating the same answers in different ways in different places, having a very, very streamlined data entry process with questions that make sense relative to the sales cycle. They also are looking for speed and decision and issues. So, if your new business cycle today is 25 days, agents expect companies in the future to be able to deliver those results in less than 20 days, 15 days, 10 days. That number is only going to get smaller, it's not going to get bigger. Multi-channel delivery is really critical, and that's something that customers are asking for. They don't want to have their mailboxes filled with contracts and papers. They don't want paper checks anymore. They want e-deposit. They want e-contracts. They want things sent to them in their email. They want to be able to see where they're at in terms of their cycle. They want to know, for instance, if they're getting a check, that the explanation of benefits comes with it. So the e-deposit transaction is accompanied by an electronic message that describes what it was that was sent to them. And the interesting new development is payment methods. Customers are looking for alternative ways to pay, not just checking credit cards, but use things like Apple Pay, use things like PayPal. We've been working on a web portal that provides support for e-app, for chat support, so that they don't have to talk to a live agent. They can actually, a customer or a broker or producer can actually have a live chat experience with one of our agents. They can get status updates. They can get electronic document delivery. They can get SMS messaging. We're working on a mobile app for agents to be able to more seamlessly quote and work interactively with their clients and with us to be able to package the right product for their customers. And we're looking at automation to really accelerate underwriting, look for a way to integrate with third-party vendors, like in the example that I gave you, and also automate the requirements process, which is today in many places a very laborious process. Analytics and social media is another component of this for companies to tap into to understand what the trends are in terms of where their market is going. And I won't drain all these slides, but to give you a sense of policy servicing, they want it now, they want it real time, they want to know that they can do what they want to do, when they want to do it, and they want to pay the way that they choose to pay. So again, web portals, e-delivery, live chat, SMS, text, all of those things are table stakes for being able to service policyholders in the future. Intelligent IVR is actually another area where we're looking at, so digital is not just about mobile, it's also about voice and using IVR effectively to be able to not just take calls and understand what the question is and route it to the right agent, but it's able to take the information from the call and translate that into data, then subsequently populates the application system, the back end, so you can have a seamless experience from the time that you call to the time that your transaction is processed, and you can get an SMS text, real time if your back-end system support that, or by the next day confirming that your transaction has been processed. So it's pretty powerful in terms of being able to adopt that kind of a framework for what is traditionally a very slow paper-based and or purely voice-based process. We'll go to the next slide, please. Same is true with claims and product design. Again, all of the TPA component, digital TPA components are similar. There are some differences on the claim side in terms of being able to integrate with providers, being able to do e-assessments in terms of the requirements, and being able to have databases available that allows claims people to do an automatic verification of providers, be it a long-term care facility, be it a physician for an APS, be it for a lab. One of the things that is critical in all of this, of course, for the first three that I talked about, is the whole design that really does support customer privacy and the integrity of the data going back and forth through the digital transaction channels. And finally, on the product design side, speed to market and agility are critical elements that we are hearing about every single day. And this really hasn't changed probably for the last 25 years, but it means something different now. What it really means today versus 20 years ago, this is not just about launching new products. This is being able to repackage dynamically product features without having to go through a full product launch every time. So having a efficient application ecosystem to allow you to do that and marrying that to customer behaviors, requirements, and demographic trends using analytics, I'm trying to tie all this together for you. This is something that insurance companies are trying to figure out, how do I solve that problem and reassemble those Lego blocks as I need to, when I need to. And recognizing that the channels are changing as well. It's not just about traditional agents and brokers. There are other opportunities to sell life products and even health products, but with the example that I gave you, with partnering with third parties, retailers, aggregators, being able to tap into a new source of market opportunities is top of mind for many of our clients. And having a highly configurable platform with an underwriting decision engine, automating the product and writer template implementation, leveraging the data to provide really strong analytics, being able to track product filings, and also monitoring any compliance issues and reporting that back to the client is something that we're asked for to do all the time. So in a nutshell, the digital journey can take many, many different paths. It could be a very short journey, a very long journey. It could be 5 or 6 initiatives happening at once. It could be one targeted one. But this is something that the insurance industry has very much top of mind. They're thinking about this because they realize they're being compared to other industry sectors who are customer responsive and friendly, and customer requirements and expectations are changing so dramatically that traditional insurance approaches are probably not going to make for a winning proposition in the future. So in that, I will end this session. I'm not sure if there are questions that have been asked, but we're going to move to our Q&A session. And I'll thank you now for your attention to both our partners from Everest and myself. And I'll turn it over to Kasia to moderate the Q&A potentially.
Surely. I can see there is one question, which is, do you see companies using more cloud-based contract management softwares to underwrite insurance agreements faster?
So so cloud-based. I'm just going to write this down to make sure that we answer the question properly.
Yeah. Do you see companies using more cloud-based contract management softwares to underwrite insurance agreements faster?
Okay. So let me try to answer that. I'm going to turn it over to my Everest colleagues who do a lot of research in this space. In terms of the desire to leverage cloud-based contract management software, I think the desire is very much there. I have not seen it adopted yet, in any real way, at least in Canada. In the US, I know there are customers that are, testing this, but what, Saurabh or Manu, would you be able to pick it up from here?
Sure, Gina. So yes, of course, this is something which we are seeing. It's more in an emerging phase as of now, wherein the idea behind this adoption is to ensure that the underwriting is fast, and a lot of at times it is dependent lot of stakeholders to avoid that and to ensure that it gets underwritten fast, and then maybe later on some reconciliation based on the report from the health insurance exchanges and medical reports, etc., can be done.
So I think the answer is, to whoever asked it, I think that it's something that, you know, customers or our clients are starting to look at. I don't know that we have seen any real adoption of this yet. It's an area that is of interest to be able to shorten the policy issuance and underwriting cycle. It's in its infancy from what I understand, from what you've said to the Everest team has said.
We got a thank you from the asker, so probably we have answered the question. There are actually two more questions, so we may attempt to answer them both within the given time. The first one is, could you elaborate on how RPA helped the company in the case study? It was asked 6:20, so I think it's a question to Everest.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. We'll take that. So the problem at hand was more in terms of the operational inefficiencies which were there in new business management, which includes underwriting, onboarding, policy issuance, and stuff related to that, as well as there were a few pieces on agent setup and death claims. So the piece on the RPA side was more centered around automation of data entry. So getting the data which is there, it could be it could be in physical form, it could be in digital form. So at one level, it was around processing of data, scanning it, ensuring that it is digitized for the part which was on the physical side, and then processing the data to ensure that no manual intervention is required on that. That was one part of it. And then simultaneously ensuring that the policyholders' details are getting updated. And then some bits and pieces around reduction of number of FTs being deployed for accounting of premiums and on the death claims as well. So this was more centered around optimizing certain processes and then ensuring that lesser manual intervention is required using the software, so using the RPA software which they accessed from a leading RPA vendor.
Okay, thank you. There's one more question which is quite long, so I will try to read it out slowly. It consists of two parts, I would say. So I will start. Implementing technology will be dependent on vertically specialized team and robust back-end infrastructure with DR and backup availability. How do you ensure user-friendly approach to the user to learn to adapt new technology and ensure more control of your assets if using process as a service or system as a service?
Wow, that's a very big question. Okay. Is that just the first part?
No, that was actually both of them. I'm sorry.
Okay. So if you look at, a traditional implementation, you're looking at a waterfall approach to installing a brand new insurance platform. You're looking at spinning up the servers, the data center, putting in the disaster recovery protocols, the change management protocols, all of those pieces. So when we look at, okay, how's this going to change from, there's two pieces. How's it going to change from an IT perspective, and how's that change from the user perspective? So I'll give you my view, and maybe I'll ask my Everest colleagues to also add in as well. My view is whether or not you are installing a traditional platform, or if you're implementing new robotics or AI technologies or what have you, data security, data recovery, disaster recovery, all of those components are table stakes. You have to know how to do this, and whether it's you're hosting it internally, or if you're hosting this with a supplier like AWS, for instance, or HP, or any of the people on the market who do this for a living, there are certain protocols that are just table stakes in terms of being able to manage that infrastructure effectively. So I don't actually see a huge difference in terms of the actual physical implementation of applications. What we are seeing, though, is a much more agile approach to digital transformation. I mean, that digital and agile are synonymous. They go hand in hand. So when you look at typical projects, when you look at, okay, so I know what the outcome's going to be, and I'm going to implement this thing in 12 months, and I know how, I'm going to go through my usual steps. With agile, is very different, where you don't necessarily know exactly what the outcome is. You have a target state that says, okay, my customer wants this. Now let's build to that. You build to that in sprints. You test it. You keep on going. The interesting dynamic here is that in traditional approaches, you have business operations people participating in the requirements phase. Then, they'd go away and they'd write test cases while the developers go ahead and build the code. And at the end of the day, they come back together to test. In a digital and agile environment, that approach is completely different, where business operations are part of the delivery team, if you will, because they're on the ground with the developers doing the design and doing the virtual acceptance as you go along. And you're right, it is a verticalized team because you actually are trying to solve a very specific problem with very specific boundaries. In terms of how do you actually onboard that into your operations, I don't know if it's any significantly different than what it is that you would do in terms of traditional training approaches, except for, if your operations are at the front end of the design, then the whole change management piece, the dynamics of change management, I would think would be significantly simplified. We've been doing some projects around robotics where the projects themselves are actually driven by business operations. They're not driven by developers. The developers are there to enable the business process, but they're not there to teach somebody how to launch an attended robot. That's something that is learned as part of the whole design process. I'm hoping that answered the question, but I'll turn it over to my Everest colleagues to add.
Thanks, Nina, and I think that was a fairly holistic answer as well. I'll add a small aspect to that one. One of the core challenges that we see in implementing any new PaaS or SaaS offerings is the change management issue that you mentioned, and a lot of them stem not necessarily from the individual's ability to just adapt to the change or adapt to the new solution, but also the buy-in that was sought from some of the individual stakeholders early on in the process. So a lot of the PaaS and SaaS solutions tend to be driven from an information technology perspective, from a CIO's desk. But in the current environment, eventually this will come down to the operations team. So getting that early buy-in from both the operations and the CIO is actually is a fairly robust approach that can help mitigate some of it. When it comes to the actual training of individual employees who need to work on the system, one of the successful approaches is to leverage a system integration partner or a pre-assigned partner from that SaaS vendor. A lot of these SaaS and PaaS players do have a robust set of partners on their roll who can offer some of these change management services. A lot of the times they can help you through the transition, they can help you implement some of these changes, and as well as at times they can help you identify and hire new employees who you can eventually kind of move over to your payrolls as well. And some of these practices have been widely observed, that especially as insurers look to adopt more holistic PaaS solutions, which require niche skill sets or at least skill sets that they don't possess already. I hope that answers the question as well.
Thank you very much. Before we close the webinar, I would like to ask our attendees to answer the very last question on how did you find this webinar? Was it useful to you, or did we not make a good job today? I will let it run for another 15 seconds, so if you could please vote. Okay, thank you very much. It seems we have done a fairly good job today. Thank you very much for attending this session, and we all encourage you to stay in touch with us. Here is our contact information. This webinar will be available on capgemini.com website, and you will all receive the link to the recording as well as the transcription of the questions and answers that we were having at the end of this webinar. Thank you again very much for joining, and have a good rest of the day.